All right, I'm gonna do a long form video. This is on, I'm gonna call it the bridge generations, and everyone is subject to this. And so what I mean is, okay, so I was born April 4th, 1984. So that makes me a millennial. Kind of an earlier, I think millennial, I think it's 80 or 81 and on. Yeah, 81 and on. So it makes me a pretty new millennial. Anyway, but that being said, like, I wasn't into pop culture as a young kid or anything. And so what I had to go off of was my parents' Gen X media, so to speak. So, of course, I watched, but even like Ninja Turtles realistically was actually more of a Gen X even than early, late Gen X as opposed to millennials, even though they kept it on the air. But all those things, Transformers, all that, love that stuff, He-Man, Ghostbusters, all that. But as far as like my parents, we didn't have cable, so they would, I specifically remember, I can tell you these bands that they played. My mother played Elton John, Yellow Brick Road all the time. A lot of Pink Floyd, The Wall, and Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. My dad, he played Iron Maiden, Live Again album. Or Live Evil or something like that. But anyway, he played a lot of Rat, LA Guns. That's the stuff I like the sound of. Like, I still do. It's still my favorite sounding music is 80s metal. And he also listened to some like classical rock stuff. Like I do remember Skynyrd. But anyway, so that was the stuff I was into, which isn't clearly my generation. So that was like a bridge. I got, back then it wasn't like you look it up on the internet or anything. It's just what I heard and what I liked. And then coming of age, when I actually started pursuing, like looking into music, I got really into punk rock. And I'm like, okay, I like this metal stuff, but then I like the edginess, rawness of punk rock. And I love both types of music. I'm not a purist. And, back then the division was, the metalheads were always against the punks. And then there was like intermediate or intercessor bands that were okay for both alike, such as Motorhead, which was kind of a punk / metal band. But anyway, so that being said, coming to age, like on my birthday, my 10th birthday, Kurt Cobain killed himself. And so I was too young, really. I don't know about you. I guess I was late to music. I didn't really hear Nirvana until I started listening to K-Rock, which was a station in Southern California. And that's what got me into, I guess you'd say, the grunge too. And so, already at this point, this was about 97. All these bands, some of them were dead, and all these bands had already been around. Like these hits, these radio hits I was hearing, they weren't even hits, they were just replays. And these songs were already by Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, all of it. They had some new stuff. But even the Sublime we heard, it was already quite a few years already in the making. And these bands had already been around, and some of them even broke up, lost members, and like I said. And so realistically, like, if I was to go to like that was more of a maybe boomer too, but Gen X thing too. But that's where that bridge generation, where I'm the bridge in between Gen X and millennials. And the cool thing is with any generation is people bridge. Look at the hipsters, man. They wanted to be like, it was such an ironic movement because it happened like early 2000s to the mids. They wanted to look like some beatnik kind of poor thrift store guy. But ironically, and the music they would play, they'd want to play on cheap vintage amplifiers and guitars. But ironically, those guitars and amplifiers became, and the clothing became really sought after and actually antiquated, and so they became whatever. But it's like those millennials were kind of like going back to the 60s, and they were dressing like it, they were buying cars like it. It's like, it's kind of a weird bridge generation thing, but it's still legit, you know. And same thing, like all the punkers, you know, punkers started in the Gen X, actually, realistically, probably the boomer generation. And so everyone had to bridge back. Yes, it evolved over time, but anything, metal or anything like that. And it just depends how heavily involved. I'm not talking about just the actual normal consumer, but the people that were in the scene. You know, the rockabilly thing, when I was like a punker, I would go to these places, and I always liked the chicks. The chicks look good in the rockabilly, but the guys to me look like dorks. And they were, same thing, the old cars, they were talking like the Fonz, and just switchblade combs and stuff, like with that one song, they call them dime store hoods. And but that was like, they were engulfed in a culture that they never grew up in. And I think everyone in a sense is like that. I heard that this Gen Z or Alpha or whatever, they're starting to like go to analog. Like they're starting to do, I read an article, like they're starting to carry these bags with stuff that we had as kids that we probably didn't even appreciate at the time, and like hacky sacks, yo-yos, whatever it may be. And they're starting to get into like vinyl and looking, you know, doing things analog, manually. And that's pretty cool, you know, it really is. Some people I'm sure would be like, oh, posers, you weren't there. And that may be true, but I wouldn't say they're posers, because we all at one point were, you know. I just don't think like it's as simple as I'm millennial. I'm a millennial, but I have that latchkey. I have more of a Gen X upbringing because of the Arrested Development. My parents basically never grew out of their 20s. My father was in the Marines, then got out. My mom, they both basically did drugs their whole life until they destroyed themselves. And so there was what I'm saying is they weren't parents. They were more like, I guess, roommates, horrible roommates, but like that had an effect, you know, and learning their ways. And so it's like, we're all, you know, I remember working in the juvenile detentions, and people would have dads that were like my age, and it was like the same thing. The kids knew, like, they knew the Alice in Chains, they knew the rock and stuff, that you're like, oh wow, that's pretty cool. But even then, like it's like we too had to be taught that one way or the other, whether we seeked it out, like in my case, in the radio or whatever. And we still had to learn about these bands and learn, like, oh, what CDs to buy, what, you know, what's the name of that song, all that good stuff. And the same thing goes obviously with, like, I feel bad for this generation. Y'all have no idea what it's like to judge a book by its cover concerning Blockbuster, you know. You go into Blockbuster, you don't know this movie, and you just look at the cover, maybe able to read a cryptic description of it, and you're like, oh, cool, that sounds cool. Most of the time you weren't too bummed, but sometimes it was like a pretty bad movie, and you're like, oh man, that sucks, I wish I didn't. But anyway, I used to think when I was younger that people that had sodas, this is how poor we were, that they were rich, and it was like a crazy luxury. I would get like maybe one soda, a few sodas a month at best, if even not all year round. But it was such a luxury. Now I just see people consuming it all the time, and it's just, we grew up, we either chose, in my thing, to be consumers, heavy consumers. We're all consumers, or we kind of chose to like stay with the old ways. And that could also have a detrimental thing, because it could keep you in a state of arrested development. You have to have a balance there. But there's like, I have so many CDs. I got some vinyl. I like the sound of vinyl, but to me it's not worth the price. That's just my opinion. It's a little expensive for something that you're not supposed to play all the time, or it wears out. It degrades every time you play it. So it doesn't seem like a good investment to me unless you're going to just collect it and not actually play it that much. But anyway, I always like the sound of tapes. That's just me. But the generational bridges that's the cool thing about it. I mean, how do you explain even cultural bridges? Like, you would never have thought like someone like Vanilla Ice or Eminem, like these white boy rappers, would have been so successful and done a pretty decent job at it, you know? And it wasn't, I don't want to say it was cultural appropriation, but it almost was, you know? And that's not a bad thing, you know, just like anything. It's like, I know that one time I saw this punk band, and it was like a bunch of black dudes, and it was surprising because I had heard their music and I just didn't expect it. And I remember we all ended up like just separately at a restaurant, and you know, they were dressed like punkers, black dudes, and these black regular thuggish black guys were talking crap like, what are you looking at? You look like a weird white boy. And they were just dogging them like they expected him to look a certain way. I don't know, but that's not to say, again, we'll call that like the generational bridges. You can be whoever you want to be, and you don't go out of your way to look and be a certain way, sound a certain way, appear a certain way at the expense of money and falsehood. You know what I mean? Like it's cool that you like Iron Maiden, so to speak, but you know what? Don't play like Iron Maiden unless you just want to be an Iron Maiden cover band, and that's cool too. But you also are your own person, and we all are, but some of us don't. We put our identities, a lot of people, hiccups. A lot of people put their identities in music. Like, oh man, I listen to metal, so I'm a metalhead. I listen to punk, so I listened mostly to punk, especially when I was younger. I never one time ever considered myself a punk rocker. I don't even consider myself a musician when people talk. I just say I'm a guy who plays guitar, likes to figure the curriculum out and just write silly songs or whatever. And that's what I enjoy doing. It's just me. It's what it is. It is what it is. It's authentic. I can tell you that. I don't try too hard, but I also work hard at it, if that makes sense. So I know this video is kind of like everywhere, but it's just talking about the bridge complex, the generational bridge. Because I can tell you, I dated girls, 2 different girls that were born strangely both in 88, and that's a huge difference. And it's funny because both of them had older brothers that were older than me a few years. So like they kind of got like the hand-me-down culture from their brothers with like the music they listened to and stuff. But it's like in actuality, like this one chick, she was really into like new metal and stuff. And new metal came around 96 or whatever. A lot of the bands she was listening to, and they went on to 2000s. But I'm like, 10 years old in 98, and you weren't in high school till 2002, when that's kind of when the new metal started dissipating. And so it's just, again, it's almost like they just need to do generation A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, blah, blah, to the end for every year, because that's how different things are amongst, there's what pop culture changes all the time, music changes all the time, new hits and stuff. So every single year, and especially now it's like trends and stuff. It's different. Everyone is different in the present as far as their generation goes, and it shouldn't just be boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Y, Gen Alpha, Gen Beta, whatever. There is more to that. And again, then once you get into the psychology of the bridge complex of is referencing to and practicing different timeline cultures, then then we're just going to call that it's kind of like you just get to kind of create who you want to be if you can do it authentically. And I think like all the stuff I was buying, like I'm like, man, all these punk CDs that I was buying, metal CDs, 80s, whatever, I'm like, all this stuff, most of those albums were before I was even born. And I'm not to say like, oh, there's not, I've also checked out some new bands and got into them, you know, not as, but there's just, you know how just the Gen Y and Gen X and millennials particularly is just like, man, we have so much good music that we'll never listen to. It's like, what? This guy in Rat played in the band with this guy and Bon Jovi and the punk drummer of the Dickies, and you're just like, wow, I'm gonna check that out. And then you go down that rabbit hole and learn, oh, this guitar player's sick, and he's only been in like a few bands, you don't even know who he is. And then that's how it is. That's how it's just, you didn't need, the internet certainly helps and expedites it, but man, that journey is a great thing. And I'm glad to see people on here doing that. And so I tell you this, for some reason, this Gen A or whatever, for my long Z and A form content, they're the ones that watch my videos the most, surprisingly, even though it's aimed for, and I don't have any generational elitist, and people need to stop that crap. Like they had a choice in when they were born. But I tell you all, man, find your tribe of people, man. If I don't know what that may be, you may like cinematography, art from the 70s in Italy, or you may like music, blah 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 blah, from this time, or you may like the fashion of this time, or whatever your hobby niche, whatever is, you know, because everyone has it. They don't want to admit it, but they do. That's where you're in a good position right now, where you can research that, where you can see what they did, how they, in band sense, created this sound, and know, oh man, well, I'm not gonna buy that Bosch 5,000 pedal that cost me $1,200 just for this sound. So you learn tricks. You can research now how to create that sound for a fraction of the cost, and that's a great thing. You're able to research. It can be a curse, but it's also a blessing if y'all do it, so y'all can formulate. We didn't have that, the Gen X's, the millennials. We were already of age. Like, I did not have a cell phone, y'all, until I was 21 years old, I think. Yeah, 21, and it was just a Nokia long form phone that had a little wristband thing you could hold on your wristband. If you went on a ride, it wouldn't fall. But anyway, yeah, you know, you all have that. It's not, you know, a lot of people may hate on you all and say, oh, you're addicted to your phones, and I hope you're not. And if you are, I hope you know, just regulate it, you know, try to be present in this world. Coming from the guy talking to thing, that's ironic, but you all, there is great hope for you all, for every generation. And like that bridge concept is, what do you like about this time, like these things, and you can bridge that back, and you can develop these behaviors and these patterns, you know, like, oh, if you like, I'm gonna talk in guitar, I love the tone of, say, Motley Crue, if that's your thing. And so all you gotta do, you look up what they played, you know, what kind of equipment, all that, and maybe even lessons on how to play that style. That's just music, but this goes vast across the board of everything that you all could mold yourselves with, but not, you know, again, do it authentically. Don't try to be like anyone else. Be yourself with your own flavor, whatever interests you have. Doesn't matter, you know. There's a reason why millennials, particularly, I don't really see much Gen X's doing videos, but mourn for a time in the past. And sometimes in the cases it is arrested development, but a lot of times it is like it was a simpler time, and your all's only chance is to go back to that. It's not, I understand, like my phone, dude, I have to go to job sites. I have to use the app on here. I have to use, obviously, the navigation app to get to the site, to put the address in there. I have to do my banking on here, my storage unit on here. And there's another thing I have to do on here. Like, life requires me to do it. I can't do it any other way. And so you all, I understand that, which, what involvement you have, but I'm telling y'all, your life will completely change. Just do the way that Gen X's or whatever it is did before the phones. Like, you're gonna have your phones, they're gonna be there. There's nothing wrong with them as they are a tool to utilize. But that being said, that's the secret to us then. Times were simpler, times were simpler, but really the truth is they were simpler because we were present. We had no choice but to be present. We had to walk to a friend's house and we didn't even know if they were there because their phone may have been busy or they didn't have a phone. And sometimes we get there and they weren't there. And guess what? That sucks. But that whole journey between to and fro, we had to be present. We had to do whatever to entertain ourselves, whatever in our head or whatever stimuli in the environment or with each other. And that's where you need to be, not on these phones. You can use these as great things, but I'm glad to hear that some of y'all are doing that, and you're starting to do things the analog, and you don't have to be pretentious about it. And what I mean by that is just, you can't be yourself. I can't, as a millennial, be myself if I was always on this. That's where I got rid of all of my social media, and I wasn't even like horrible on it like some people, but even then I felt, oh man, it still evoked certain emotions sometimes and took more time than it should have. Excuse me, I'm sorry. But anyway, y'all are in a good position right now. I know this is a long video, and I hope just a few watch this, but that's the secret right there. That's why what we're all mourning for is to be present again, to have the illumination of distraction shunned off of us. That's what it is, y'all. Anyway, take that with a grain of salt. Have a good day.